The sun was just coming up over London. It was a big day. People from all over the world came to see the royal family at Westminster Abbey. They stood behind metal gates on both sides of the road. Some had been waiting since last night. Mrs. Brown came with her two small children. They'd wore their best clothes. She brought sandwiches and juice boxes in a bag. "Will we see the Queen?" asked her little boy Tommy. Mrs. Brown smiled. "Yes, if we're lucky." Next to them stood Mr. Wilson. He was old and had seen many royal events. He told stories to the children about the times he saw the Queen when he was young. "There was always something magic about seeing them in real life," he said with a twinkle in his eye. The police walked up and down the road. They were friendly and talked to the people. One policeman gave stickers to the children. Everyone felt safe and happy. News people with big cameras set up their equipment. They talked into microphones about the special day. TV screens were put up so everyone could see what was happening inside the Abbey later. Jane was a young woman who came from America just for this day. She wore a hat with the British flag on it. "I've waited my whole life to see the royal family," she told the people next to her. "My grandmother loved them so much. I wish she could be here with me." Food trucks parked nearby. The smell of coffee and pastries filled the air. People bought hot drinks to stay warm in the cool morning air. A man sold small flags and pictures of the royal family. Children waved their flags with excitement. Inside Westminster Abbey, workers rushed around. They'd put flowers on every pillar. The flowers were white and pink and smelled sweet. Men in black suits checked every seat. Women polished the wooden benches until they shined. The choir boys and girls practiced their songs one last time. Their voices echoed in the big stone church. The organ player pressed the keys, and music filled every corner of the Abbey. Outside, more and more people arrived. The crowd grew bigger by the minute. People from Japan took pictures. A family from India wore colorful clothes. A group of school children wore their uniforms and held hands so they wouldn't get lost. The sky was clear blue. Birds flew around the tall towers of the Abbey. A bell rang out 9 times. Everyone knew this meant there were only 2 hours left until the royal family would arrive. Mrs. Brown lifted Tommy onto her shoulders so he could see better. "Look at all the people," he said with wide eyes. The crowd stretched as far as he could see in both directions. Everyone was there for the same reason. They wanted to be part of history. They wanted to tell their friends and family they saw the royal family with their own eyes. They wanted a memory they would keep forever. The police moved some cars away from the road. They put up more gates. A red carpet was rolled out from the street to the Abbey door. When people saw this, they cheered. It was really happening. The royal family was coming soon. 2 big black cars drove slowly down the road. These weren't the royal family yet, but important people who would be inside the Abbey. Ladies wore fancy hats. Men wore dark suits with shiny medals. The crowd clapped as they walked into the church. A group of soldiers marched up to the Abbey. They wore red coats and tall, black furry hats. Their shoes were so shiny you could see your face in them. They stood very straight and didn't smile. They lined up on both sides of the red carpet. News helicopters flew overhead. Their cameras zoomed in on the crowd and the Abbey. People at home watched on TV. The news lady said, "Over 1 million people are watching from around the world right now." Tommy pointed at the soldiers. "Look at their big hats," he said to his mother. Mrs. Brown nodded. "Those are the Queen's Guards. They protect the royal family." Jane from America took many pictures with her phone. She wanted to show everyone back home. An old man next to her used an old camera. "I've taken pictures of every royal event since I was a boy," he told her. "I have albums full of memories." More important cars arrived. The crowd got more excited. People pushed forward to see better. The police asked them to step back. Everyone was polite and did what they were told. A lady in a blue dress stepped out of a car. "That's the Prime Minister," someone shouted. The crowd cheered as she walked into the Abbey. She stopped and waved at everyone with a big smile. Inside the abbey, all the seats were now full. Important people from all over the world sat together. Kings and queens from other countries, movie stars, sports heroes. They all talked quietly while they waited. The organ music changed. It became louder and more grand. This was a sign that the royal family would arrive very soon. The choir stood up. Their white robes looked clean against the dark wood. Outside, police motorcycles appeared at the end of the road. They drove slowly with their lights flashing. Behind them was a long line of black cars with flags on the front. The crowd went wild with excitement. People cheered and waved their flags. The first royal car stopped at the red carpet. The door opened. Out stepped a young prince and princess. They were dressed in beautiful clothes. The princess wore a light pink dress with a matching hat. The prince wore a blue suit with gold buttons. They waved at the crowd. The princess saw Tommy on his mother's shoulders. She smiled and waved right at him. Tommy's face turned red with happiness. She waved at me, he shouted. Mrs. Brown felt tears in her eyes. This was why they had come. More royal cars arrived. More princes and princesses, dukes and duchesses, each one more grand than the last. The crowd cheered for each person. Some people called out their names. The royals always smiled and waved back. The sun was high in the sky now. It made the gold on the royal clothes shine brightly. Camera flashes went off like stars. The red carpet looked like a river of red leading into the dark abbey door. Two big black cars drove slowly down the road. These weren't the royal family yet, but important people who would be inside the abbey. Ladies wore fancy hats. Men wore dark suits with shiny medals. The crowd clapped as they walked into the church. A group of soldiers marched up to the abbey. They wore red coats and tall black furry hats. Their shoes were so shiny you could see your face in them. They stood very straight and didn't smile. They lined up on both sides of the red carpet. News helicopters flew overhead. Their cameras zoomed in on the crowd and the abbey. People at home watched on TV. The news lady said, "Over 1 million people are watching from around the world right now." Tommy pointed at the soldiers. "Look at their big hats," he said to his mother. Mrs. Brown nodded. "Those are the Queen's Guards. They protect the royal family." Jane from America took many pictures with her phone. She wanted to show everyone back home. An old man next to her used an old camera. "I've taken pictures of every royal event since I was a boy," he told her. "I have albums full of memories." More important cars arrived. The crowd got more excited. People pushed forward to see better. The police asked them to step back. Everyone was polite and did what they were told. A lady in a blue dress stepped out of a car. "That's the Prime Minister," someone shouted. The crowd cheered as she walked into the abbey. She stopped and waved at everyone with a big smile. Inside the abbey, all the seats were now full. Important people from all over the world sat together. Kings and queens from other countries, movie stars, sports heroes. They all talked quietly while they waited. The organ music changed. It became louder and more grand. This was a sign that the royal family would arrive very soon. The choir stood up. Their white robes looked clean against the dark wood. Outside, police motorcycles appeared at the end of the road. They drove slowly with their lights flashing. Behind them was a long line of black cars with flags on the front. The crowd went wild with excitement. People cheered and waved their flags. The first royal car stopped at the red carpet. The door opened. Out stepped a young prince and princess. They were dressed in beautiful clothes. The princess wore a light pink dress with a matching hat. The prince wore a blue suit with gold buttons. They waved at the crowd. The princess saw Tommy on his mother's shoulders. She smiled and waved right at him. Tommy's face turned red with happiness. "She waved at me," he shouted. Mrs. Brown felt tears in her eyes. This was why they had come. More royal cars arrived. More princes and princesses, dukes and duchesses, each one more grand than the last. The crowd cheered for each person. Some people called out their names. The royals always smiled and waved back. The sun was high in the sky now. It made the gold on the royal clothes shine brightly. Camera flashes went off like stars. The red carpet looked like a river of red leading into the dark abbey door. Part 3. A silence fell over the crowd. The last and most beautiful car had arrived. It was long and black with gold details. Small flags flew on the front. The royal seal was painted on the door. Everyone knew who was inside. The driver, dressed in a dark green uniform, walked around and opened the door very slowly. First, a shiny black shoe appeared. Then, the king stepped out. He stood tall in his navy uniform. Gold ropes hung from his shoulder. Medals covered his chest. Each medal told a story of service to the country. He turned and held out his hand. The queen took it and stepped out of the car. The crowd gasped. She wore a light blue dress that seemed to shimmer in the sunlight. A small crown sat on her perfectly styled hair. Diamonds sparkled with every small movement she made. Together, they stood for a moment, looking at the crowd. Then they smiled and waved. The noise was incredible. People cheered, clapped, and some even cried. This was the moment everyone had waited for. God save the king. Someone shouted. Many people joined in. The chant grew louder and louder. The king nodded his head to thank them. The queen's eyes looked wet with emotion. Townie could hardly believe his eyes. They looked just like in my storybooks. He whispered to his mother. Mrs. Brown nodded. There was something magical about seeing them in real life. They didn't seem like regular people. They seemed special. The king and queen began to walk on the red carpet. They moved slowly. They stopped many times to talk to people in the crowd. The queen bent down to speak to a little girl who gave her flowers. The king shook hands with an old soldier who stood straight and proud. Jane from America couldn't stop taking pictures. No one will believe I was this close, she said with tears in her eyes. The old man with the camera just smiled. He had seen this magic many times before. Inside Westminster Abbey, the royal family took their seats at the front. The king and queen sat on special chairs with gold on them. The other royals sat nearby. The abbey was very quiet now. Everyone waited for the service to begin. Outside, the crowd stayed in place. No one wanted to leave. Big TV screens showed what was happening inside. People watched with great interest. Children sat on their parents' shoulders to see better. The archbishop, dressed in white and gold robes, walked slowly to stand in front of everyone. He carried a big golden staff. His voice was deep and clear as he welcomed the royal family and all the guests. His words echoed off the stone walls. The service began with a song. The choir boys and girls sang with pure, sweet voices. The sound floated up to the high ceiling. People closed their eyes to listen. It was a very old song that had been sung for kings and queens for hundreds of years. The king and queen looked at each other and smiled. They had been married for many years. They had seen many hard times and many happy times. Today was a happy day for them and for the country. The archbishop read from an old book. He talked about duty and service. He talked about the history of the royal family. He said they were a bridge between the past and the future. The king nodded as he listened. A young prince stood up and walked to the front. He was the king's grandson. He read a poem in a clear, strong voice. Though he was young, he did not seem nervous. He had been trained for moments like this since he was very small. The queen watched him with proud eyes. When he finished and walked back to his seat, she reached out and touched his hand. It was a small gesture, but people watching on the screens outside saw it and smiled. It showed that even royal families have the same love that all families have. Outside, the crowd watched the screens with great interest. They're just like us in some ways, Mrs. Brown said to Tommy. They love their family too. Tommy nodded, but he still thought they were like people from a fairy tale. The service continued with more songs and readings. Each person who took part had practiced many times. Everything was perfect. Not a single mistake was made. This was how royal events always were, perfect in every way. A princess played the violin. The sad, beautiful music filled the abbey. She played so well that some people cried. When she finished, there was a moment of complete silence before everyone clapped. The king stood up to speak. His voice was strong and kind. He thanked everyone for coming. He talked about the country and its people. He said the royal family was there to serve. They were there to help make the country better. "We are nothing without you," he said, looking at all the people. "It is your support that gives us strength." The Queen nodded in agreement. Their faces showed that they truly meant these words. Outside, people clapped when he finished speaking. They felt proud of their royal family. Even people who had come from other countries felt the special feeling in the air. There was something about this family that touched hearts. The service inside Westminster Abbey was coming to an end. The choir sang one last beautiful song. The organ played softly. The king and queen stood up, ready to leave. Everyone else stood too, out of respect. Outside, the crowd grew excited again. They knew the royal family would soon come out. The police moved into position. The soldiers stood even straighter, if that was possible. Everyone wanted to see the royals up close one more time. The large wooden doors of the abbey opened slowly. Sunlight poured in, making a bright path on the stone floor. The archbishop came out first, still carrying his golden staff. He stood to one side of the door and waited. Two small children came out next. They were a prince and princess, both about 6 years old. They wore miniature versions of royal clothes. The little prince wore a small uniform with a red sash. The little princess wore a light pink dress with a tiny tiara. The crowd made soft, happy sounds when they saw the children. The little ones smiled shyly. They had been told how to behave, but they were still just children. The little princess gave a small wave, and everyone cheered. Then the other royals began to come out, one group at a time, each dressed in their finest clothes. The ladies' dresses moved in the light breeze. The men stood tall in their uniforms and suits. They all paused at the top of the steps, looking out at the sea of people. Jane from America couldn't believe how close she was. "They're even more beautiful in real life," she said to the old man with the camera. He nodded. "The TV never does them justice," he replied, taking more pictures. Tommy was getting tired from sitting on his mother's shoulders, but he didn't want to come down. "Just a little longer," Mrs. Brown told him. "The king and queen will come out soon." Tommy held on, not wanting to miss anything. Finally, the moment everyone was waiting for arrived. The king and queen appeared in the doorway of Westminster Abbey. The sun hit them perfectly, making them look like they were glowing. They stood still for a moment, taking in the incredible sight of thousands of people who had come to see them. The crowd erupted in cheers and applause. Flags waved faster. Camera flashes went off everywhere. The king smiled and raised his hand in greeting. The queen's face was full of emotion as she waved to the people. Slowly, they began to walk down the steps. They did not rush. They took their time, pausing often to look at different sections of the crowd. They wanted everyone to feel seen and appreciated. When they reached the bottom of the steps, something unexpected happened. Instead of getting into their car right away, they walked toward the barriers where people stood. The security guards looked surprised, but quickly moved into position around them. The crowd couldn't believe their luck. The king and queen were coming to speak to them. People pushed forward gently, hoping to be noticed. Children were lifted up. Phones were held high to take pictures. The queen approached the section where Mrs. Brown stood with Tommy. She smiled up at the little boy. "Have you been waiting long?" she asked in a kind voice. Tommy was too shocked to speak. Mrs. Brown answered for him. "Since morning, Your Majesty, but it was worth every minute." The queen reached up and touched Tommy's hand. "Thank you for coming to see us," she said. Tommy found his voice at last. "You look like a fairy queen," he said. Everyone around them held their breath. "You weren't supposed to say such things to the queen." But the Queen laughed, a real warm laugh. "What a lovely thing to say," she replied. Then she moved on to speak to other people. Mrs. Brown knew that this moment would be a story they would tell for years to come. The king moved along the line of people, shaking hands and talking briefly with many of them. He had a special way of making each person feel important. He looked them in the eyes when they spoke. He remembered names if he had met them before. An old man in a wheelchair was there. He wore old military medals on his jacket. When the king saw him, he stopped. He bent down to be at eye level with the old soldier. They spoke quietly for a few minutes. The king placed his hand on the man's shoulder. People nearby could see that both men had tears in their eyes. Later, they learned that the old man had served with the king's father many years ago. It was a powerful moment that showed the deep connections between the royal family and the people. The security team looked at their watches. They'd whispered to each other. The royal couple had already spent more time with the crowd than planned. But the king and queen didn't seem to care. They continued their slow walk, not wanting to miss anyone who had waited for them. Jane from America couldn't believe it when the queen stopped in front of her. "You've come a long way," the queen said, noticing Jane's American flag pin. Jane nodded, too nervous to speak at first. Then she blurted out, "My grandmother loved you so much. She collected all the royal teacups." The queen's eyes softened. "How lovely. Please give her my best wishes." Jane didn't have the heart to say her grandmother had passed away. Instead, she just nodded again. Somehow, she felt her grandmother was there with her in spirit. Seeing this moment, a small girl broke through the barrier and ran up to the queen. Before the security guards could stop her, she hugged the queen around the legs. There was a moment of shock. This was not supposed to happen. But the queen just smiled. She bent down and returned the hug. Then she spoke softly to the little girl before a guard gently led her back to her parents. The crowd cheered at this sweet moment. It showed the human side of royalty that people loved to see. The king was given a cup of tea by an old lady who ran a small shop near the abbey. She had served tea to his mother years ago. The king remembered the story and made a point to find the lady each time he visited. He took a sip of the tea and declared it perfect. The old lady beamed with pride. Her tea shop would now be even more famous. People would come from all over to drink tea where the king had drunk it. Small moments like this were part of what made the royal family so special to the people. Finally, it was time for the king and queen to leave. They walked back to their car, turning many times to wave at the crowd. Just before getting in, they stood together and gave one last, long wave to everyone. The queen leaned close to the king and said something that made him smile. Though no one could hear the words, it was clear they were sharing a private moment of happiness. After so many years of marriage, they still enjoyed being together on days like this. As the royal car pulled away, people started to leave too. The crowd broke up slowly. No one was in a rush. They wanted to hold on to the special feeling of the day for as long as possible. Mrs. Brown helped Tommy down from her shoulders. His legs were stiff from sitting so long. "The queen talked to me," he said in wonder. "Wait until I tell my friends at school." Mrs. Brown knew he would remember this day for the rest of his life. Jane from America stood still, watching the royal car until it was out of sight. The old man with the camera patted her arm. "First royal event?" he asked. She nodded. "You never forget your first one," he told her with a kind smile. As the afternoon went on, people slowly left Westminster Abbey area. The streets that had been so crowded were now almost empty. Workers came to clean up. They picked up dropped flags and empty coffee cups. They took down the barriers and folded up the red carpet. But the feeling of the day stayed with everyone who had been there. People went to nearby parks and cafes. They talked about what they had seen. They shared photos on their phones. They called family members who hadn't been able to come. Mrs. Brown took Tommy and his sister to a small cafe. They were all tired but happy. Tommy couldn't stop talking about the queen. "She touched my hand, right here," he said, pointing to his small fingers. "I'm never washing this hand again." His sister rolled her eyes. "You have to wash your hands, Tommy. The Queen wouldn't want you to be dirty." This made sense to Tommy. He nodded seriously. "You're right. The Queen would want me to be clean." Jane from America found herself sitting with the old man who had taken photos. His name was Mr. Parker. He showed her his camera, which was very old but still worked perfectly. "I've taken over 10,000 royal photos with this camera," he told her proudly. They looked at some of the pictures he had taken that day. They were beautiful. He had a special eye for catching small, human moments. "Would you email me some of these?" Jane asked. Mr. Parker laughed and shook his head. "I don't do email, my dear, but give me your address, and I'll mail you some real prints." Jane wrote down her address on a paper napkin. It seemed like the start of a friendship that would cross oceans. Inside Westminster Abbey, things were quiet now. The flowers were still fresh. The candles still burned. A few staff members moved silently around, putting things back in order. The huge space felt peaceful after all the excitement. One young worker paused to look at the place where the king and queen had sat. He touched the wooden chair gently. He had been working at the Abbey for only a month. This was his first royal event. He felt proud to be part of such an important place. Back at Buckingham Palace, the royal family gathered for a private lunch. They sat in a room with golden walls and paintings of their ancestors. But despite the grand setting, they acted like any family. They talked and laughed about things that had happened during the day. The king mentioned the old soldier he had met. "He served with father in the war," he told everyone. "He remembered things I had never heard before." The queen nodded. She knew how much these connections to the past meant to her husband. The young prince who had read the poem was praised by everyone. He blushed at their kind words. Though he seemed so confident in public, he was still just a boy who wanted his family to be proud of him. The little princess who had given a shy wave talked about the crowd. "There were so many people," she said with big eyes, "and they were all looking at us." Her mother stroked her hair. "They were looking at you because they love you," she explained. As they ate, the family watched some of the TV coverage of the event. They saw themselves through the eyes of the cameras. Sometimes they laughed at how serious they looked. Sometimes they nodded at a moment that had gone particularly well. The king raised his glass in a toast. "To the people," he said simply. Everyone understood what he meant. Without the love and support of the people, the royal family would have no purpose. They existed to serve. Days like today reminded them of that important fact. Later that evening, Mrs. Brown put Tommy to bed. He was very tired, but didn't want to sleep. "Tell me the story again," he said sleepily. "Tell me about the Queen." Mrs. Brown smiled and began the story of their day, knowing it would become a family legend. The next morning, newspapers all over the world had pictures of the royal family at Westminster Abbey. The front pages showed the king and queen waving from the steps. Inside pages had photos of the other royals and stories about the day. One newspaper had a picture of the queen hugging the little girl who had run up to her. The headline said, "A Queen's Touch." Another paper showed the king talking to the old soldier. Its headline read, "Bonds that last through time." People who hadn't been there read the stories with interest. They looked at the photos and wished they had seen it in person. The royal family had a special magic that reached beyond borders and across oceans. Mrs. Brown bought 3 different newspapers. She wanted to keep them to show Tommy when he was older. She cut out the best pictures and put them in a special box where she kept important family memories. At breakfast, Tommy was still excited. "Can we go see the Queen again today?" he asked. Mrs. Brown smiled and shook her head. "Not today, dear. The Queen is very busy. But maybe we can go to the palace and see the guards." This made Tommy happy. He quickly ate his breakfast. His sister wanted to go too. She hadn't been able to come the day before because she was at school. She was a bit jealous that Tommy had seen the Queen up close. Jane from America was at the airport, waiting for her flight home. She had bought souvenirs in the gift shop, tea towels with the royal faces, a small model of Westminster Abbey, and a mug with the king and queen's picture on it. She thought about her grandmother, who had loved the royal family so much. "You would have loved being there, Grandma," she said quietly. She felt a strange sense of peace, as if her grandmother had somehow been with her during the special day. Mr. Parker, the old man with the camera, was at home developing his photos. He worked carefully in his small darkroom. He had been taking photos of the royal family for over 50 years. His walls were covered with pictures of them at different events. He selected the best photo from yesterday, the king and queen standing together on the steps, the sun making them glow. He would add this to his collection. He also set aside some photos to send to Jane in America. He liked the idea of his photos traveling across the world. At the small tea shop near Westminster Abbey, the old lady who had served tea to the king put up a new sign. It said, "Royal Tea Shop, by appointment to His Majesty." It wasn't officially true, but no one would argue with her. Her shop was already full of people wanting to sit where the king had sat. Social media was full of photos and videos from the day. The royal hashtag was trending worldwide. People shared their personal stories of seeing the royal family. Some posts got thousands of likes and comments. One video showed the moment when the Queen spoke to Tommy. Mrs. Brown was surprised to see her son's face on the internet. The video had been seen by millions of people already. Tommy was a little bit famous now. A TV channel did a special program about the day. They interviewed people who had been in the crowd. They showed footage that hadn't been seen before. They had experts talk about the clothes the royals had worn and what each medal and badge meant. The Archbishop who had led the service was interviewed. He spoke about how the royal family connected the country to its past while looking toward the future. "They are a living link to our history," he said, "and a symbol of stability in changing times." At schools across the country, children drew pictures of what they had seen on TV. They wrote stories about the king and queen. Teachers used the event as a way to teach history and tradition. Even very young children understood that something special had happened. In other countries, people talked about their own royal families, or about not having one. They compared their traditions to British ones. The world seemed a bit smaller, a bit more connected because of the shared experience of watching this ancient ceremony. A week had passed since the royal family's visit to Westminster Abbey. Life had returned to normal for most people. The newspapers had new stories on their front pages. Social media had moved on to new trends. The cleaning staff at the Abbey had removed the last of the flowers. But for some people, the memory of that day stayed strong. Tommy still talked about the Queen every day. He had drawn a picture of her at school. His teacher had put it on the wall, and all the other children had been impressed that he had met the Queen in person. Mrs. Brown had framed one of the newspaper photos showing Tommy on her shoulders waving at the royals. It hung in their living room now. When family came to visit, Tommy would tell the story of the day, adding more details each time. Jane had returned to her home in America. The photos that Mr. Parker had promised arrived in a small package. They were beautiful, printed on special paper that made the colors look rich and deep. She had them framed and hung them in her living room. Her friends came to see the photos and hear about her trip. Some didn't understand why the royal family was so special to her, but when they saw the pictures and heard her stories, they began to feel some of the magic too. Mr. Parker continued his daily routine of reading about the royal family in the newspapers. He added his new photos to his collection. He started planning for the next royal event he would attend. At his age, each one might be his last, but he didn't think that way. He believed he would see many more. The old soldier who had spoken with the king received a special letter. It came in an envelope with the royal seal. Inside was a note, handwritten by the king, thanking him for his service and for sharing memories of his father. The old man cried when he read it. His family would treasure this letter forever. The little girl who had hugged the Queen became a minor celebrity in her town. People stopped her mother in the street to talk about it. The local newspaper did a story about her. "I just wanted to hug her because she looked so nice," the little girl explained simply. At the palace, life went on for the royal family. They had more events to attend, more duties to perform, but they too remembered the day at Westminster Abbey. The Queen kept a small album of photos from special events. She added one from that day, a picture of her talking to Tommy. The King mentioned the old soldier to his secretary. "Make sure we invite him to the garden party next month," he said. This was how the royal family worked, remembering people, making connections, showing that they cared about individuals even while serving the whole country. The young prince who had read the poem so well was given more responsibilities. His father told him how proud he was of him. "You are learning what it means to serve," he said. The young prince nodded seriously. He was beginning to understand the weight and the honor of being royal. And so life moved forward. The day at Westminster Abbey became part of the long history of the royal family. It joined thousands of other days, other events, other moments when royalty and ordinary people had connected in a special way. Years would pass. Tommy would grow up. Jane would show the photos to her children someday. Mr. Parker would eventually put down his camera for the last time. The old soldier would tell his story to younger generations. The little princess who had given a shy wave would one day be a queen herself. But the magic of that day would live on in memories and stories. It would be part of the rich tapestry of history that the royal family wove with the people. It was this connection, this shared experience, that gave meaning to ancient traditions in a modern world. In the quiet of Westminster Abbey, where kings and queens had walked for 1,000 years, the echoes of that day joined the countless others that lived in the ancient stones. And outside, in the busy streets of London, people went about their lives, carrying with them the small, precious memory of the day when the royal family's majestic Westminster Abbey entrance had truly captured their hearts.